You don't want your employees to be idle, so why would you want your robots to be idle? Zebra Technologies is addressing idle robots by bringing their latest solution to the market, which requires 30% fewer robots, resulting in increased asset utilization and a cost-effective entry to automation for your fulfillment operations. The Zebra Symmetry fulfillment ecosystem is bringing you balanced utilization, more cubic capacity, and optimized pick paths so you can operate at peak performance. Want to take your fulfillment operation to the next level? Learn more at zebra.com or click the link in the show notes.
The New Warehouse Podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
Hey, it's Kevin with the New Warehouse Podcast, bringing you a new episode today. And on today's episode, I am going to be joined by Oda Bolden, who is the Director of Supply Chain Network RSD Manufacturing at Bayer Healthcare. And Oda is going to bring to us a lot of experience in the industry, and I'm really excited to tap into that and learn kind of what he's seen throughout his career and some of the specialty things that his supply chain does within Bayer as well, how they approach their distribution setup, what they do on the warehousing side. And we're also going to talk a little bit about, what he sees are some of the challenges in the warehouse part of the supply chain, and also talk a little bit about some of the labor things and how he deals with them as his own, as I'm sure, a lot of us deal with in the warehousing side and what we've seen in the industry overall. So very excited to dive into this conversation and talk to Oda today. So Oda, welcome to the show. How are you, sir?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well, doing well. Happy to get you on and happy to hear from your side of things what warehousing and supply chain looks like these days. So why don't you kind of tell us a little bit about your background and your role too at Bayer Healthcare? Tell us a little bit about you.
Sure. So as you mentioned, I am the director of the supply chain network for RSD manufacturing. RSD stands for Radiology, Sterile Disposables. It's a part of our radiology business, which falls under our pharmaceuticals umbrella. At our sites, we produce consumable products that are used for contrast enhanced diagnostic imaging, which if you've ever had one of those images, you would probably have used one of our products. So my team supports 3 sites that manufacture our consumables, 2 here in the Pittsburgh area and 1 in Costa Rica. And across those sites, we share some suppliers. We try to share best practices. The role of my team is to focus on developing and implementing strategy, continuously making improvements that are key to our flexibility, our efficiency, and most of all, our optimizing our supply chain costs.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. It all comes down to costs at the end of the day. Right. Typically. Yeah. But Costa Rica, man, that's a nice location. I love it in Costa Rica. So very jealous that maybe you get the opportunity to go there. So very interesting there. And I think definitely, obviously a very critical product and item that you're working on, right? So it needs to be very dialed in and optimized, as you mentioned there. So now tell us a little bit about your kind of that distribution network setup that you have. You mentioned the 3 facilities there. So now are you handling all of the distribution of those items and storage of those items in-house? Are you leveraging 3PLs at all? What does that look like?
So I'm going to start with the support of manufacturing. From a manufacturing standpoint, we have some transportation, movement, and warehousing in-house. We do use third parties for some of our transportation, particularly outside of the Pittsburgh market. When it comes to our distribution center, we have a distribution center that's operated by a large 3PL. My team is focused on moving material into that distribution center, and that distribution center is operated by, like I said, a well-known 3PL, and we have an in-house manager who is kind of the liaison between Bayer and between that company.
Gotcha. Interesting there. And yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. So on the manufacturing side, right, you're handling kind of the movement of the materials there, getting things produced, and then maybe some storage before it moves off to the 3PL, who's then actually going to handle wherever it ends up getting delivered to at the end of the day. Is that the correct?
That's correct. Another key part of our operation, in terms of what we produce at our sites, we have to send it out to a third party for sterilization. So I have an individual on my team who coordinates that movement. Some of that movement's handled by our in-house resources. Other parts of that movement are handled by a third party partner that we use. So the finished material goes from our site to a contract sterilization site and then back to our distribution center.
Interesting. So there's a couple of different movements happening in there. So tell us a little bit about how do you handle some of those additional movements and the complexity there too as well? Because when I mean, imagine it goes to get sterilized, right? And then, you have to keep it in a clean environment so you don't have to sterilize it again, essentially, right? In those additional movements. So talk to us a little bit about that kind of complexity there and how you handle that.
Well, once the product is manufactured and packaged, it no longer has to be in a clean room environment, but obviously we're using medical products, so we want the product to be clean. So as we're transporting, part of what we do is make sure, whether it's one of our trailers or a trailer belonging to one of the freight companies that we work with, we're inspecting that trailer for damage prior to us loading our product onto that trailer to move to sterilization. And a good part of that is our primary desire is to drop off product and pick up product. So that's optimizing our costs. We're working at doing round trips versus one-way round trips. So if we've inspected that equipment on this end and we're using the same equipment to move product from our sterilizing site to our distribution site, we know that we should be in pretty good shape with that equipment.
Interesting. Yeah. And I can imagine that the processes that you have in place, especially from that inspection standpoint, need to be pretty dialed in. So I'm curious, tell us a little bit about, what does that look like from an SOP perspective or like a training of an employee? How do you utilize some kind of technology to make sure that inspection is done properly? How do you ensure that that's getting thoroughly done each time it occurs?
The inspection is mainly just a visual inspection where we will have a material handler walk into the trailer looking for holes or anything, because we don't want the product to get wet, because that wouldn't be a good thing. And also for our trailers, we go through just a daily inspection by those drivers. And that is documented. Again, it's mainly a walkthrough and a checklist.
Gotcha. Interesting. Okay. All right. Interesting stuff there. And interesting to understand too how that works. And I think it's an interesting, you look at the supply chain as a whole and warehousing. And I think, outsiders maybe would tend to generalize it a little bit, but everybody's supply chain, I think, is a little different, right? And I think, yours in that sense where you have that sterilization step happening too. That's certainly, not something that every supply chain is going to have. So interesting to see how you navigate that a little bit. And so I saw that you've been at Bayer now for almost 35 years, right? Which is very impressive, I will say. And congratulations on that too. But I'm curious, over that time, certainly there's been a lot of things that have changed in the supply chain. And I'm curious, what stands out to you as, maybe the biggest evolution in the supply chain in those 35 years? And maybe what are some of those things that really made a big shift in the way that you do things?
Well, one thing as we've grown, where we went from one site to doing sterilization in-house to multiple sites and contracting that sterilization out, different sterilization methods, we've had to adapt to that growth in terms of how our processes are. And that's been one of the biggest challenges, as well as just kind of the way that we manage those movements, trying to go from totally paper-based to starting to use some technology to help us to track the material and to, make sure we know where the material is and it's flowing the way that we want it to flow.
Yeah. Interesting there. And interesting you mentioned from, paper-based to now adding some type of technology to help manage that. And I'm curious to hear. I've been through that type of transition in my career as well, and it's certainly a very interesting change and a big change is in my experience. And I'm curious, how did you navigate that change, and what would be maybe some advice or takeaways you took from a project like that for people that maybe haven't made that transition yet?
I think the biggest part of any change is to make sure that you're getting feedback from the people that actually do the work and let them be a part of the solution. And one of the things that we've done, even when we've gotten pushback, is okay, I understand you have concerns, but let's try it. And then we'll evaluate it. And if some of the things that you're concerned about come to pass, then we will adjust. So, not looking for that perfect solution right out the gate. Because if you look for that perfect solution, you'll never make the change.
Mm, interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a great point there is like, it's not going to be 100% perfect. And yeah, when you go live with something, whether it's software, hardware, whatever the case may be, I mean, there's certainly going to be some hiccups at some point. I think it's rare that a go live is ever, just 100% perfect right off the bat, right? So, there is some adjustment period there. So I'm curious, I mean, as a leader within the supply chain, right? How do you recommend, people make sure that they're involving those workers? Like, what's the right approach, and how do you make that a part of I guess, the culture overall, whether it's, in your entire supply chain or within just your operation, whatever you're responsible for?
Yeah, that's actually in the time that I've been here, that's always been a part of our culture is, not going with kind of the necessary hierarchy that you see in a lot of large companies, but working toward we're all here with one goal in mind to get product to our end customers. So let's work together and come up with the best way to do that. I think one of the biggest challenges, though, is sometimes you implement a change which may be good for one part of the business, but maybe not for another part of the business. And getting that agreement that, okay, while this change might not be good for you, the next change might be. So let's focus on the end goal and not necessarily the individual goals.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a great point too, right? I mean, because you change something and like, yeah, like we changed this and yeah, with this department, this task they were doing, like now it's great, right? It's moving faster, or it's it's less errors, more accurate, whatever the case may be. And now all of a sudden, like the department, like down down the road, right? That's like, receiving whatever output that department's putting out is like, oh, this isn't good for us, right? Like this is, causing us now more headaches, right? So I think that's a great point, and I think there's two really great takeaways there to, get that on the floor, everyday user involved in the process and have them understand the change that's coming into play, right? And have them try it, like you said, even though there may be some resistance. And then also, to be able to, collaborate and include all the departments and stakeholders that might be impacted in some type of change to, not fix one problem to create a new problem, I guess, in a sense, right? Which I think is a great thing there. So now, if you look at warehousing in the current landscape, right, I'm curious, what do you think are some of the, top of mind challenges that you're facing or maybe just seeing in the industry in general?
We'll be back after a quick break.
Have you heard of Nucor warehouse systems? Well, they should definitely be on your radar. Forge a connection with the Nucor warehouse systems team at ProMat 2025 and learn about their sustainability, safety, automation, and end-to-end storage solutions in booth S1056. That's booth S1056. And make sure to join us on a panel hosted by Nucor Warehouse Systems on Monday, March 17th at the Sustainability Transportation Theater, where I will be moderating a discussion on the process of recycling steel and how companies can reach sustainability goals within the warehouse. We will see you in Chicago.
I think the number one challenge, definitely in warehousing, but we're seeing it in a lot of areas, is staffing.
Mm.
It's really hard to consistently get the staffing that you need and to get them to stay and to challenge them and show them that it's actually not a job, it's a career, and you can grow your career.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that has been such an ongoing challenge. And, I think there's two parts of it there, which you mentioned there. It's kind of like, getting the labor in a sense and then, keeping the labor and, giving them some longevity, right? Or something to, aspire to in terms of a career, like you said, right? So, and I'm curious too. I mean, you've been at this for 35 years now, and you've seen kind of. I think at some point it's probably an abundance of workers, maybe, and then obviously that's in recent years there's certainly been a decline in people that have a desire or want to work in whether it's a manufacturing or a warehouse facility. So, tell us a little bit about what are you doing, I guess, to approach this? How are you kind of strategizing to, I guess, first, get these workers that you need, and then, secondly, keeping them and not having to go out and get more a couple months later, right?
One of the things that we're doing is we're working with temp agencies to bring employees in, and that's the pool that we're trying to hire from. So that gives us an opportunity to bring them in and to see what their work ethic is, to see if they fit on the team. I'm a strong believer in fit as it relates to putting someone on a team, because they have to work together. And so if you bring someone in that's disruptive to the team, it's kind of a double-edged sword where you don't have a good worker and now you're upsetting the rest of the team. So by working with these temp agencies, it at least gives us an opportunity to see, is this a person that we want to bring on full time? Is this a person that's going to connect with the team and be a productive part of the team?
Mm. Yeah. And I think that's such a great point there, right? I mean, you bring in somebody and now, not only are they maybe not performing as you would like them to perform, but they're, disruptive and they're impacting the performance of the team as a whole, and other people don't want to work with them. They don't want to be around them. It's kind of like a little bit toxic in a sense, right? So I'm curious on the other spectrum. Someone asked me this question last week. Actually, I'm curious your perspective here, because similar. What happens if you're in a situation where you have someone on the team, right, that's productive, right, maybe high performer in terms of productivity, but then they don't necessarily get along with members of the team, right? From like you talked about fit, right? From a fit perspective, maybe they don't quite fit, but they are like a top performer from productivity, whether it's, manufacturing production or warehouse production, whatever the case may be. How do you kind of navigate that and deal with that?
I think first and foremost, you have to coach and you have to try to bring self awareness and continue to work with that person to integrate them into the team. And unfortunately, if that doesn't work, then it may be time to part ways. Even though they're a high performer, if they're not getting along with the team, if they're not contributing to the team, is that bringing the overall performance of the team down? So you have to look at the activity overall, not just at that individual.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a great point there. And it is challenging, right? Sometimes I think to deal with that situation because you have, obviously you want productivity, right? You got to get the job done, right? But then, if you do have somebody that's, yeah, like they're great and they're hitting their, hourly UPH or, whatever numbers they need to hit, maybe exceeding them in some cases, right? And then you got, half the team, saying like, oh, this person rose us the wrong way, or, they're creating issues. And, like from a personality perspective is definitely a challenging thing to do. Right. So very interesting to hear your thoughts on that and your advice there as well. Now, in terms of the staffing, you mentioned you leverage temp agencies there to be able to it sounds like kind of almost like trial out employees and see, do we want to keep them on for the long term? But what about from a technology perspective? Have you guys made any kind of investments in technology to either help, attract workers because it's a little easier to do the job, or, try to bring in technology to help get more production out of one person versus maybe two or three in a sense?
We've done a little bit of both. I mean, that's an area I wish we could do more, but I also, tell the team that we may not be able to get a home run, but we could get a bunch of singles and that'll still work. An example of that is I mentioned we do some of our own in-house trucking. And we're relatively new to that. We're into our third year. And when we started out, we were managing kind of the routes for the drivers on an Excel spreadsheet. We worked with one of our engineers and he created an app, and we've made several improvements to that app where we can just put their information into, I believe we use a SharePoint, and then they can pull it up on their phones. And as they complete one stop, they could acknowledge that's complete. And so that's made their job easier. We also try to talk to them to see, okay, what other things can we do to make your job easier? So we've done that. Another example, we didn't have consistency in our receiving operation where like we receive a lot of full truckloads of raw material,
Yeah.
but deliveries weren't consistent. We might get 10 trucks one day and two the next day. So we implemented a dock scheduling software to get a handle on that. So we have used some technology to make the job easier. Really looking to do more because I think we're just touching the tip of the iceberg in terms of what could be done. And like you said, to both help the employees that we have, but also as we continue to grow, to reduce the burden of constantly being in this. We need to hire more people. We need to hire more people.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Because I think you look at that, and I think it's interesting. It's interesting to hear from you as someone that's kind of living it day to day, and has been living it for quite some time in the same organization, seen kind of these changes, I guess, in the workforce. I would say. I mean, because tell us a little bit because y- you know I've been working in warehousing industry since like 2011, right? So don't have as much wisdom as you will say in that case, but we see a lot of factors I think that have gone into this labor shortage, and I've lived it as a warehouse manager and plant manager, especially during the pandemic when I was in the facility every day, trying to figure this out and trying to find workers from somewhere, right? So tell us a little bit about what did you see as kind of like the shift there where, because I imagine, earlier in your career, it wasn't as challenging to get workers as it is now, probably. So tell us a little bit about where did you see that shift kind of happen, and what do you think is really like the underlying cause of that?
Yeah, I can tell you the when. It seems like during the pandemic, there was a shift. The why, I think we're all still trying to figure that out. The solution isn't pay more because everybody's doing that.
Yeah.
So something different happened with the pandemic. Don't know what it was. Maybe it's that people found other ways to make money. Not really sure, but that's when we started to see a shift.
Yeah, absolutely. And same here. I mean, I think that's really when it became noticeable. And, it's interesting to see too, and, figure out how to navigate that. So, you mentioned you're looking at other options, other, potential technology, of a desire to do more of that, to see what's out there. So I'm curious, is there any like specific pain point right now that you're dealing with, or technology specifically that is really top of mind for you that you're trying to tackle here in the new year?
One of the things, and it's could be partially a technology solution. One of the things that I like to look at, and not necessarily a formal KPI, but how many times are we touching that material
Mm.
from the time you unload it from the truck until the time it gets to the point of use? How many times are we touching that material? And what can we do to reduce the number of times that we're touching it? And there's some technology solutions there. For instance, at receiving, sometimes when we're receiving material, one person takes it off the truck, and then after an inspection, someone picks it up and takes it to the storage area. Is there a way for us to maybe eliminate steps like that? Go to more of a directive put away where the system's looking at the data and telling us, okay, this is a high running material. Where possible, put it at a 4 level so you can easily move it. So those are some of the types of things that we're looking at now, trying to look at the things that we've learned over the last 5 to 10 years. And if we knew them 5 or 10 years ago, how would we do them differently now? And I think this whole thing of how many times you're touching the material, it's a productivity question. And there could be some technology solutions, but there could also be some process improvement solutions that we should be looking at.
Mm. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that is such a great point there about the touches, because, oftentimes when you have the human element involved, right? Sometimes there's a tendency to maybe just touch things more than is really needed, right? But when you start to bring in some technology to either, put some, call it like guardrails around that, whether it's for the human operator or from an automation perspective, then you start to take away those touches, and now you start to save some seconds, and seconds turn into minutes, right? Which turn into hours, which is all, cost at the end of the day, right? And I think that's how you start to begin to optimize. So I love that you're looking at those little things there in between and trying to figure out like, well, how do we eliminate, some of these touches and make it more streamlined in a sense, smarter placement, certainly, like you mentioned, putting a faster moving item on the floor versus like up high in a rack or something like that, I think is a great perspective too as well. So really interesting to hear about your setup and the supply chain that you're dealing with, and some of the intricacies there, as well as how you're navigating some of these labor challenges, and also looking at technology in that sense too. And I'm curious from you, as we look to close out the conversation here, I want to get like one just kind of tip from you, maybe a leadership tip from you as you've been a leader in the space for quite some time. What would you say for, because you mentioned in there, people aren't necessarily looking at warehousing as like a potential career anymore as maybe they used to, right? So what would you give as a tip for someone that's, younger in their career, looking to be a leader in warehousing, leader in supply chain, whatever the case may be? What would be like your one leadership tip for them?
I think going back to something I said earlier about getting involved with the team and letting the team help to drive the strategy. And I think as you take the team and you move them away from, I just come in to move material, to a higher level where they're looking at, how do we move material more efficiently? How do we be more flexible? How do we ensure that we're getting the product to the customer when the customer needs it? I think that puts a different spin on it versus just, come in, take that box from point A to point B and do that every day. So I think that just that overall team involvement is huge in terms of how you can motivate the team.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a great one too, is like, not just come in and this is what I need you to do, but also, come in and this is why I need you to do it and how could we do it better in your opinion, right? Like, open that forum up. And I think that's a great way to be. You get a lot of great feedback in my experience from the floor and, like, oh, could we do it this way instead or something of that nature? And, I think that's a great tip there from you, Oda. So I really appreciate you sharing that and definitely appreciate you coming on the show today as well, so we could tap into some of your expertise there. Now, if people are interested in maybe getting in touch with you or learning more from you, what's the best way to do that?
The best way would probably be my email address here at Bayer. My first name, Oda.Bolden@Bayer.com.
All right, great. And we'll definitely put that at thenewwarehouse.com and in the show notes so people can easily find it if they want to tap into your knowledge a little further. So, Oda, definitely appreciate you coming on, joining me on the show today and sharing your time with us so we can learn a little more from you.
You've been listening to the New Warehouse Podcast with Kevin Lawton. Subscribe and check us out online at thenewwarehouse.com.
Enjoyed this episode? Make sure you are subscribed to the podcast, and for more content from the New Warehouse, find us on LinkedIn and YouTube. Links to subscribe can be found in the show notes, and for everything The New Warehouse, head to thenewwarehouse.com.